And I'm going to pop up, apart from I'm going to try probably doing too many things, and Canva will be like, this is too much stuff. All right, screen share. Okay. Rightio. So yeah, today's workshop is really around a little bit of what compassion is, but how we can start to cultivate compassion. And as I said, it's really the aim of these masterclasses or workshops is to be fairly relaxed, but also worthwhile of your time, I hope, as well. So we'll be going through a couple of compassion exercises that we can start doing to strengthen our compassion for both ourselves, but then, so I guess the idea of self-compassion, but it's then, I guess, a pretty good muscle that we can use for those around us as well. And then what we'll do is then spend about 20 minutes or so going through the two frameworks that we use, and I'll introduce them in the masterclass, because it is then a way of basically stepping back and getting a different perspective on situations that we might find ourselves in. So what we'll do is we'll use compassion for the frame in doing that. So what we shall do to start with is, I guess, just recognizing that you've taken the time to be here today, whether it's coming in and taking the time to be here live, or also taking the time to watch the recording afterwards, and just do a brief little grounding exercise to recognize that you're here now. So if you're comfortable, start by closing your eyes, and Liz and Tiffany, those of you on here, you can turn your cameras off if you prefer, but I'm not really looking at them anyway. And so get yourself into a position that is alert and aware, kind of with your spine sitting up straight, and allow your eyes to gently close. And so just start by bringing your attention to your breathing. Notice the breath flowing in through your nose, and notice it as it gently flows out again. Just allow yourself to center here for a few moments. Letting your breath find a slow and steady rhythm. You may even place your hand on your heart for a few moments to just remind yourself that you're here in the room, and to bring kindness to yourself. Bring awareness to your whole body in the room, noticing your feeling of the feet on the ground, notice the feeling of the chair under your legs, then bringing your attention to your torso, noticing that breath flowing in and out. Just letting yourself be aware of your breathing. Notice any thoughts that come up as you go through this exercise. Just allowing yourself to start to bring to mind someone who embodies that idea of compassion for you, whether it is a friend or a loved one. And just picture yourself when you do spend time with them. Noticing that feeling of compassion connection and kindness. Notice what that feels like in your body when you spend time with someone who you really care about and someone who really cares about you. We can start to create that sense of compassionate inner self by creating and practicing a loving kindness meditation. You might just repeat the words to yourself in silence, and just with awareness of what you notice inside of you. Just say, may I be happy? May I be peaceful? May I be safe? May I live with ease? And just take a few moments to notice what arises in your body, what you become aware of. Just notice with curiosity. And you can practice this as well for others around you. So thinking of someone you love, a friend or a family member, people you spend time with, or even a stranger. And keeping that in mind, again, repeat those words to yourself. May you be happy. May you be healthy. May you be safe. May you be at peace. And taking a few moments just to notice what it feels like as you cultivate that sense of compassion, that warmth, and that wisdom, but also that sense of strength that can come when you build that compassion as well. And as you're ready, opening your eyes, coming back into the room. So often when we think of compassion, it's something that we tend to, or people kind of go, well, I can't be kind or I can't be compassionate to myself because if I did that, I'd just sit on the couch eating chocolate all day. But what the research has shown, and when compassion training has been brought into place, particularly in like the clinical sphere and in terms of therapy, is that it's a muscle, it's a set of skills that we can strengthen and build. And compassion has been found to really help improve in a whole lot of ways. It helps build our flexibility to show up during difficult times. It helps build our ability to kind of get different perspectives, to be able to kind of step back and treat ourselves and those around us with kindness as well. And a couple of things that I think are actually really cool is that regular compassion practice actually has health effects as well. So it starts to improve, like regulate your heart rate, improves your immune system, and basically it's taking us out of that continued stress response. And me being a full disclosure, I think that's as far as I came to in those bits of slides. So just out of curiosity, Liz and Tiffany, since you're here in the hot seat, how did you find kind of doing a compassion exercise? Is it something that you've done before? Or is it different to what you've done previously? Oh, hang on, you're on mute, Liz.
I know, I'm trying to unmute. Oh.
Not remuted.
There we go. I haven't. I struggle to do those sort of things. To sit there in silence and visualize and whatever else. I can sit there in silence and start to drift off to sleep, but I'm probably more of a, reading words and write them down and stuff like that. But so, it's probably a skill that I need to improve, or I can improve on if I want to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think it's good to recognize though, because the more longer form mindfulness type exercises, they are really important, but they're not the only way to practice this stuff. So we can also build, so particularly focusing on compassion, it can be done in ways like, so there's lots of exercises even around letter writing. So doing it through writing, if that's kind of a format that fits more, or even just simple little, almost like prompts that we can put in of thinking to ourselves in a tricky situation, okay, how would I say this to someone I really care about? Or how would I say this to a good friend? Can be a way of starting to build it. So I think we often do the more longer exercises to start to, I guess, kind of introduce the approaches, but it's not the only way. So if it's a way that's not particularly comfortable for you, then that's okay as well. Yeah. Any thoughts for you, Tiffany?
Yeah, no, I have done a bit of it through yoga, but I need to get back into it. I think a skill you sort of have to work on. Like just then, my mind was wandering a lot, and I was struggling to do that one today. It probably doesn't help that I'm actually sitting at the office. So I was thinking of all the things that I'm looking at. But yeah, I find it easier in, say, a space where you've gone to yoga, and you're, at, a nice place and out of the house where you can't be distracted.
No. I've got almost like nothing open on my computer and it's just gone really slow on me. Anyway, are you both still there?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I think it's because I don't know what's going on. You change to new internet systems and think that you're going to have more data, but it somehow ends up being less data. Right. So you were saying, Tiffany, like it's practices you've done before, but yeah, when you haven't done it for a while, then you kind of find that your mind's getting even more distracted around the place. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm quite similar as well. And I think sometimes things like yoga, or even whether it's doing walking or that, like I quite like this idea that particularly mindfulness we can bring to all the things that we do, because it can be really uncomfortable when we just sit down to do a mindfulness exercise, because it's almost like your mind's gone, woohoo, I'm now going to go like haywire and go all over the shop and think of all the thinking and all the things that I'm going to do. And so I think that's actually what the practice is. It's not about stopping your mind or even sometimes not even slowing things down, but really about building in that ability to notice. And so that's probably why actually in thinking out loud, why within lots of the resources and things that we've got around and the exercise that I do in here for Act for Ag, I talk more about noticing rather than mindfulness. I kind of see mindfulness as a tool that we can use to build our noticing skills, but then our noticing skills are things that we can bring to each and every situation. And so then in today's situation, what I kind of see is we're building this framework for actually noticing really with kindness and compassion as well. And I think I was actually just thinking about this over the last 12 hours as I've been kind of pulling things together and gone, I think particularly this idea around compassion and kindness, there's a reason a couple of months ago why I did choose it to be the focus one for our our first masterclass, because I think it is such a skill that the thing I love about it is it's a muscle that we can build. And so a lot of the trainings that I've been to kind of gone, so there's an approach called compassionate mind training, and there actually can be an element of fake it till you make it. So you can do some of these practices even when you're not necessarily feeling like them, even when it doesn't feel comfortable to you, or even if your mind's kind of coming in and going, no, we don't speak like that to ourselves, we tend to beat ourselves up or whatever it is. But by putting the practices in place, it starts to tweak some of that. And then particularly looking at just in the context of farming, I think there just are so many uncontrollable, like my words disappearing on me, uncontrollable factors and all of that unpredictability, that when we approach life kind of holding on really tight to how we think things should be, I guess almost having that rigidity around how we want life to be, that can be when we do get really stuck in that struggle. And you would have seen, I kind of describe this community as a place where we are coming together to let go of the struggle and embrace the juggle. And I think compassion kind of comes into that embrace the juggle section, that unfortunately we're not, well, I don't know, fortunately, we're not living lives that we can just go, right, I'm going to put the juggle aside. I'm going to stop trying to do all of these extra things, and I'm just going to focus on one thing at a time. Because you sit down to do the one thing and then the phone rings and your husband says, I need you to go and pick up this part straight away. Or you think you're doing the right thing with the mob of sheep and you're putting the wrong lambs back with their wrong mums. Like, little things happen all the time that just don't go to plan. And so embracing the juggle with kindness and that sense of compassion, to me, really is where we can start to hold things a little bit more lighter for ourselves, that we can hold ourselves with a bit more kindness. And then when we do stuff up and go off track, we can kind of bring that compassion back and kind of go, okay, well, what would I say to my best friend if she was in this situation? How can I kind of treat myself with that same type of kindness that I have? And then I think the next step of that is also then starting to bring that compassion into our relationships as well. Because I think, and this might be my personal reflections again at the moment, particularly during those times of stress, it's the ones closest to us who we then tend to take things out on the most. And so if we can start to bring in that element of compassion, and even again that thinking of, okay, well, what might I say to my best friend in this situation might be very different to what I say to my husband in that situation. And not saying that we have to be those ideal partners and things all the time, but just starting to step back, get a little bit of space from tricky situations at times, and then finding a way of asking a question, whether it's, okay, what would I say to someone I really care about? Another perspective on compassion that I find really helpful, and I think Brené Brown kind of said it, is this idea that everyone is doing the best they can in that situation with the context of what's going on around them. And so thinking about even that element when we get those times, like, for me last night, my husband was in an absolute shit of a mood, and I've come home from a conference after a couple of days and I'm just like, why am I even home? And then today we got a couple of moments to talk about it, and it was that, prices dropped. We sold sheep that we had bought in, and they actually sold for less than we bought them for. So that was a failed gamble that he'd done. The weather's turned really shitty. He's feeling sick as well. We'd applied to lease some land and didn't get that through. So a whole heap of things in there. But in that kind of that acute situation of last night, when part of me could see that all of this stuff was going on behind the scenes, but also there was a part of me going, I don't have to be the bad guy here. I don't have to be the one bearing the brunt of all of that. And so kind of thinking as I go here, giving myself my own therapy session, but in being able to bring a little bit of compassion to that, it helps me to get a bit of perspective in saying, okay, I'm not actually at fault here. He can be grumpy without it being my problem to either fix or me personally to be at fault. But then that compassion, so I guess it's an element of self-compassion, kind of going, I'm worthy, I'm okay just as I am, no matter what's going on in the world around me. But then that element of compassion into our relationship of kind of going, okay, he might be stressed, he might be tired, he might be exhausted. Yes, he could probably say things in a different way or whatever it might be, but being able to approach him with that element of compassion and kindness as well. So a little bit of rambling all over the shop from me, but I think my two kind of key things there in just really simple ways that we can build that compassion is pausing, noticing, looking at, okay, what might be happening in this situation and how could I speak differently, or how can I change the way I frame these? So I think this is where using the noticing map can be really helpful. So I'm going to pop up this tool now. If my screen decides to not be incredibly slow. And then I reckon my computer must be like updating or something in the background. Can you guys hear me okay? Is it just my side that's gone slow? Cool. So in the chat, I've just popped a link in the chat. And so then both of you will be able to jump in to this screen now that I've shared here, which this is the basic framework of what we'll be going through in each of the monthly masterclasses, but and then I'll also send out a notepad with these things on it, and then in the tools and resources section you can print this out as well. But this is what we call the noticing map, and it's a perspective taking tool really, and it looks at the fact that as humans we have these four I guess approaches or domains. So in the middle section here, we have our drivers of our behavior. So on the horizontal line, that we're either driven to move towards the things that are important to us or away from the things that might be painful or uncomfortable. I guess like all animals, we're either driven to move towards safety, towards connection, towards food, or away from danger, away from threats and harm. But unlike humans, what we also have is, unlike animals, sorry, we have both our external world, everything going on around us that we experience with our five senses, but also our internal world, everything that goes on in our mind. So the stories that our mind tells us, our memories, our thoughts, our feelings, also all of our physical sensations that we are aware of as well. And we have this really key linchpin ability, I guess, of being able to notice. So a lot of the time we might be on autopilot and this stuff just tends to happen to us. But if we build this noticing here, then we can start to notice, okay, well, what is most important to me? What is happening within my skin? And I guess that's where mindfulness as a tool comes in, is it's really just strengthening our noticing and our awareness muscle. It's building our ability to notice, okay, here's the thoughts of being frustrated, or here's the thoughts that this isn't fair. And then we can also start to notice what we're doing, the things that a fly on the wall might see us doing on the outside. So I'm going to step through using this framework. And so both of you, if you've been able to join, oh, hang on, am I in the right spot? Yeah, I should be able to. Yeah, if you click on the link, then you should be able to join in to the board, but otherwise I can kind of just talk through. Oh, yeah. I love this, is it gives really funny names. So the anonymous shrew just joined. So what we can do is basically think about, okay, what was that, Tiffany?
Oh, I can't join, I think, but it disappeared. And then I can't seem to join that link.
Oh, weird. It's a day for tech issues.
Unless it's, no, I can't join. But nothing come up. But see, I'm on my phone, I'm not on my computer.
Yeah, it might be phone. That's okay, because what we can do, because there's only a couple of us, we can work through this anyway. So if we think about, I don't know, I'm going to make a big assumption here, but guessing that if I use the example of last night and my husband being tired and me being tired and both of us kind of not having a whole lot of patience for each other, have you both been in that situation before?
Oh, yeah.
Beautiful. All right. So let's use that as an example situation so that we can explore like what we might do in bringing compassion to that situation, just for ourselves to start with. So if we focus on building compassion, but let's go compassion in stress. Okay. So we start in this top right-hand corner of looking at, okay, so who and what actually matters most to me in this situation. So I'm going to start by popping in compassion as a value. So what we're kind of thinking of is what are some of the values that are important, but also like, so how do I want to show up in this situation? So I'm going to think about kind of what it would look like if I was building compassion, but also like who and what. So obviously for me in the situation last night for my husband is actually important to me when I pause and think about it, and also myself as well. Anything else that you got, like if you think of during times of stress, who and what might actually matter most to you?
Family, kids.
Yeah. 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 And if you think of like the idea of compassion, because it is quite a big, broad, overarching thing, what are some of the things that you think of? I'm just trying to think of how to frame this. Like, what does compassion kind of mean to you? Like, so it can be things like that idea of kindness. It might also be like some of the other ideas behind compassion is this recognition of like our shared humanity, that this idea that struggling is normal and everyone struggles. So there are a couple of things that I think of, but anything else that kind of comes to you when you think of what compassion might be?
Understanding.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think understanding too.
Yeah.
And probably flexibility, like, you know, yeah, being flexible to that person, you know, like just.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so we kind of start to get this picture of, okay, during times of stress, if I hold the frame of compassion in there, also kind of think, okay, my family, my kids, my husband, myself is important, but coming to this with an approach of kindness and understanding, flexibility, and that idea of struggling as being part of human nature as well, or not so much struggling, suffering, pain can be like, it's not something that we can just get rid of all the time. I'm going to do this a bit differently this time, because you can kind of go through this framework in any shape or form. But if we hold on to these things here, if we were really living in line with all of these things being what matters most to us, what would that fly on the wall see me doing? So if I think about last night, or you think about a time, a stressful time, and both you and your partner are stressed out, what would it look like if you approach that situation with compassion? So for me, and I'm also practicing holding lightly to the part of my head that's telling me, yes, Steph, you didn't do any of this stuff last night. Thinking in an ideal world, what might some of the things look like? So for me, it probably would have been taking 5 minutes to actually just go in and say, hey, how are you going? And being there to listen to his response, whatever it might have been. Any other thoughts on what it might look like in those stress times, of what if you were holding and moving towards those values that we put up the top there?
Having patience, maybe.
Yeah. And what would, like, if a fly on the wall could kind of see you being patient, what would they see you doing?
Not arguing back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So kind of stepping out of those arguments when you can kind of see that this is not productive at the moment. Yeah. What would it look like if we kind of, during those times of stress, brought some of that kindness, understanding, flexibility towards ourselves?
Not taking it personally.
Yeah.
It's all easier said than
might
done.
even be like saying something to yourself like, this isn't about me. And that ability almost like to step into a bigger perspective and see everything else that's going on as well. Yeah. And it might even be like, I'm just kind of thinking as well, and in a way I kind of did this. So it was getting ready. I had to get food ready for cheering last night as well. And I was like, oh, well, instead of getting stuck in replaying how things aren't working out or whatever in my head, it was like, right, let's just pop Netflix on the iPad and do something enjoyable while I'm doing the things that I have to do. And so sometimes that can look like a distraction tool, but for me, when I step back and look at it last night, it was kind of a little bit like, actually, I've got things that I have to be doing, let's make it enjoyable at the same time. So that was a bit of a way of treating myself with compassion as well, and kindness. But to me, I guess compassion for myself is sometimes a little bit about doing something enjoyable, but also probably thinking of like, what do I need to do to take care of myself as well? So it might actually be kind of going, okay, you probably do need to go for a walk, because that's going to help you manage the stress a little bit more. So doing something like that as well. And so we can kind of start to see, okay, there's lots of things here that we would be doing, even kind of maybe, like we said, stepping out of the argument, approaching the other person, actually taking that time to listen and ask how they are. But life tends to happen, and we tend to get a whole lot of stuff show up inside of our brain that gets in our mind, that gets in the way of doing those things. So what might be some of the things, and this might be like the thoughts that come up, the feelings, the sensations. So when I think back to last night, there was a lot. There was like thoughts around, I guess it was kind of like, I haven't done anything wrong. Why is he taking it out on me? I'm really tired as well. We're all tired. probably like that, it's not my fault. A bit of a it's not my fault thing, but instead of sometimes like being able to step back and not take it personally, it was a bit of a it's not my fault, so leave me alone kind of thing as well. Or thoughts about what else can kind of get in the way of compassion. Probably sometimes as well, like I've got too much to do, like I can't stop and take care of myself because I've got too much to do. Any other things that you guys can think of that tend to come up and get in the way of moving towards what matters?
I think sometimes if you're coming back from a trip, like if I've gone somewhere else and then you come back and it's almost like they've just lumped all what they've had issues with kids straight onto you. And so you're straight back where you were, and your trip might not have necessarily been relaxing or something for yourself. It might have been that you were doing stuff too. And it's like, well, normally I've got them all the time anyway. So yeah, it can be a little bit of the day sort of want to lump on you, but like you said, you've got too much to do and you come back and reality's hit and you don't want to lump with that as well.
Yeah, so kind of that frustration that comes up, and probably like almost a bit of that it's almost like your mind's like, I do this all the time, why can't you? In a way. And often like what can come up, particularly like I know for me in those times, whether it's like a bit of resentment that starts to kind of bubble into relationships as well. Just the tiredness is there from being away as well. So I start to kind of get this picture of just some of the things that start to show up under the skin. And the more we stop and pause and notice, the more we can kind of start to pay attention to what some of that is that shows up. So then down in this bottom corner is again the stuff that we do, what a fly on the wall would see us doing. But it's looking at, okay, when I get really hooked up in this stuff up the top, like it's not my fault. Why can't you just do what you need to do? I've got too much to do. The frustration, resentment, all of that stuff comes in. What do I tend to do when that stuff shows up? So for me, again, probably last night was a mix of some helpful things, some not helpful things. It was kind of like a little bit of, if I don't catch myself, I start kind of almost like stomping around while I'm doing the dishes and doing this and doing that. It's like, well, I'll just stomp and passively express my frustration at you, which isn't really the best way of doing it, but it's almost, I don't know how you say it, stomp around. I'll just stick with that one. And then probably like replaying all of those thoughts up the top over in my head as well. And then my mind loves to then replay all of the other times that the same stuff has happened as well. Yeah. Any other things that you guys kind of notice when you get, like you said, Liz, you come home from being away and everything's all piled up? Any of the things that you tend to do that your mind's like, it's almost like your body goes, oh, I'll do this to get rid of all of this discomfort.
I probably do exactly what you've just written there anyway, is get all frustrated in my head and then just get into stuff that has to be done, or you just go to bed grumpy.
Yeah.
And because it's just, it's a bit of a like I don't like to go to bed grumpy, but sometimes you're just like, I don't have the patience to drag this out and figure out what's going on either. So, because you're just as tired.
Yeah. And I think that one, I think is one like that we can hold lightly. Like you always hear those like 5 tips to having a healthy relationship and don't go to bed grumpy. And I'm like, you know what? Sometimes no one's actually got the mental capacity to have a reasonable conversation. So let's go to bed grumpy and start again the next day. And in this framework, like what we're looking at is it's not that this lower left-hand corner down here is necessarily like the bad stuff, and this side over here is the good stuff. It's just starting to look at, okay, how workable are these things in the short or the long term? So say, one of the other things that I sometimes do as well is just put my music on while I'm doing it. So he might be sitting and just trying to relax for 5 minutes and watch TV. So I put music on and crank it up, plus stomp around, and it just like amplifies the whole situation. And I kind of say I'm putting the music on to make myself feel better, but if I don't put the right music on, I'm really just amplifying it more and more. And so you can look at and go, okay, well, how workable is this in the short term or the long term? And so if we look at this idea of replaying all of those thoughts in my head, in the short term, they kind of do, like they feed back into it, but it's almost like, oh, if I keep thinking about this stuff, maybe I can fix it, maybe I can get rid of it. So it gets rid of that discomfort a little bit in the short term. But in the long term, if I look at, okay, how well does stomping around, replaying those thoughts, cranking the music up, how well does that help me move towards all of this stuff that matters to me most up here, of treating myself with kindness, treating my husband with kindness, kind of creating that understanding and flexibility. And long term, not really working so well. So that's where then we kind of start to look at, okay, down in this section down here, how do we practice doing all of this? That practice of remembering to go and ask and have a conversation of how are you going, or even probably asking and listening to ourselves and saying, hey, Steph, how are you going right now? To practice doing that even when all of that tricky stuff can come up here. And so then that's where we can put in. So part of that just starts to come through creating noticing, because when we start to build in noticing, we then put ourselves back in the driver's seat. We then start to get that ability to make the choices. But I think that's then where we can start to put in a couple of these little kind of compassion practices. So a couple that kind of come to mind for me might be just this idea of reflecting, what might I say to a friend in this situation? Of that being able to step in and just ask yourself, like, how would you bring some compassion to this? And then even starting to do, and I might pop one up as well in the community, because I obviously am a bad judge of time sometimes. I don't realize how quickly the time goes, of what it would look at, like just some simple compassion exercises that we can practice. And that'll be what will be the focus across the month in like the Little Rocks reminders and those exercises. There'll just be a couple of different types of compassion exercises. So it might be a bit of a trial this month of going, okay, well, what would it look like? Almost a bit of an experiment of going, okay, if I just practice 5 minutes a day over 5 days in the week of a small compassion training, how would this start to shift the dial a little bit? What would that look like? What would be any things that either of you think about or comes to mind about, like, what are the little steps that you could put in place that help you to do these things down in the bottom right hand corner, even when all of that frustration or discomfort or all of that stuff shows up?
Maybe actually not expecting it, but I guess expecting it, like preparing yourself. So if you're coming home, then or changing how you do come home. So if it's, you can tell this happened a few times with me, can't you? If you you're walking the door and perhaps changing the way you do things. So rather than unpacking and going, noticing that stuff's everywhere and whatever else, then perhaps just going, well, I'll just sit down with you in front of the TV instead and just leave it all. I don't know, just something, or expecting it and going, okay, well, if I'm prepared that someone might be a bit frustrated or the kids are acting up, well, then just yeah, if you know it's going to happen, then perhaps changing what you're going to do when you walk in the door.
Yeah, and it's almost, that's a little bit of that not taking it personally kind of thing. It's like if you can kind of prepare and know that this is what tends to happen most of the time, then kind of pulling back, okay, well, what can I control and what can I do? And it might, again, yeah, be a bit of an experiment. You might find something that works and then find something that doesn't work either. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's, I think, a bit of like not having unrealistic expectations. Like I used to think, oh yeah, my husband will, clean all the house and have it wonderful when I get home. But that was never going to happen. So why, like he doesn't do it now, why would he do it while I'm away? Like, so yeah, having that when you do go home, that realization.
Yeah, so it's kind of like those unrealistic expectations, kind of those things that show up and get hooked, but then maybe it's something about starting to just like hold those expectations a little bit lighter. Like they're still probably going to show up, but then also kind of noticing and kind of going, okay, let's just hold that a little bit looser without getting really hooked on how that should turn out. Yeah. Oops. Oh, so I realise. Oh, I don't know. I'll play with that later. Okay. So, given that I've jumped through, so I really have to get better at managing time. What we can also do with this exact same map, but I won't do it now. I'll just switch it over to it to show it to you. But I think something that's come up in, even as we work through that map there, is that this is something that, one, we can create it for ourselves, but it's also very much through our relationships as well. So we use exactly the same map there, but can create it or change it to a shared purpose. So a map that we can use for our relationships, or when there's more than one of us. And we won't work through it now. I will get better at my time management so that we can in the future. But I'll just pop it up on the screen and just show you to get a bit of an idea. And because I think what's also important to reflect is, like you just said, Tiffany, is that, I think you said it as well, is like we do get stuck. These same situations happen frequently. And while there's a lot that we can change, and it is focusing on what we can change individually, I don't think it all has to be 100% on us either, but it's going, okay, how do we start to have these conversations around shifting the dial a little bit or helping things look different? And I find this is where this shared purpose map can become quite helpful in just opening a space to have the conversation. So it's exactly the same framework, but instead of looking at, okay, who and what matters most to me in this situation, it's looking at who and what matters most to us. I don't know how to make it much bigger because it's probably absolutely tiny on your phone, Tiffany, so don't stress too bad about it.
I can scroll in and look, so I've just zoomed in. Yeah.
So it's the same frameworks, but it's looking at what happens most to us, what gets in the way of us moving towards what matters, what do we do when that inner stuff shows up. And so what it might be, and maybe this might be a bit of a take-home task for us all to try out over the month, of firstly practicing using the map for ourselves, but then using the map in our relationships, of kind of going, you might work through it yourself individually, but then kind of go, and I've done it with my husband frequently for creating the templates and all of this. And it's like, we know it helps, but it's actually taking the time to sit and do it. But to maybe frame the conversation of going, you know, when I get back from being away for a few days and then things go really shitty, and it would be much nicer if things just worked smoother from the start. I've learned about this new perspective. I don't know if it's going to work or not, but maybe we could kind of muddle through it together and see how it works. And so then you kind of sit down and you look at, okay, well, just in terms of, it might be put the situation of being, situation might be coming home, time away. And that might be like just one partner coming home or both partners coming home from time away. But you start to look at, okay, well, who and what matters most to us? And so it might be things like, yeah, family matters. Each of us, our partner matters. And then thinking about, well, how do we want to be in those situations? How do we build that compassion? How do we build that connection? It might be starting to look at, okay, connection, something that really matters to us. And then it's looking at, okay, so where we value connecting, we value having this time back together, but what shows up when I walk in the door and life has happened? And it might be what shows up in the way of us. So that might be where kind of that tiredness comes in, or it can be a way of framing and going, okay, well, what might tend to show up for couples in this situation? So then you can kind of go, oh, well, actually, resentment might be something that shows up for people. So you can have those conversations a little less confrontingly than like, when you do this, this is what happens. And so then we can look at, okay, well, what do we tend to do when all that inner stuff shows up? So it might be like that, oh yeah, we avoid talking, or I just go and watch TV. Or like you said, go to bed grumpy. And so then it's kind of looking at, okay, how well do all of these things here help us move towards what matters most? And then going, okay, if we were really living in line with what actually mattered to us most, what would we be doing? And so then that might be, like you said before, Liz, of going, okay, maybe we put aside all the things that we have to do as soon as we come in and just actually sit down and watch TV together for 10 minutes before getting into the things we have to do. Or I think, like we said, of like being able to, well, I wonder whether one of the things that we didn't actually put in there before was actually asking for help and not just kind of coming in and having to superwoman it all to get everything back on track as well, or having those stepping out of the arguments but still having some of those tricky conversations as well. So that is like literally a sprint through that section, but does that show you a little bit like how we can use that framework even for kind of bringing it out into our relationships or into kind of that wider space?
Yeah.
So it is now on us, because one of the things that my idea in this masterclass of what we can do is almost look at, okay, well, over the next month, this idea of creating compassion is what we're going to be focusing on in the community. And so I'll do that through just kind of the little articles and reminders that go out. But from what we've talked about, because we all pick up on slightly different things, what do you guys think would be either individual things you could focus on, or a couple of things that we can use as our like kind of goalposts within the community of what we'll be focusing on, so that then when we jump back in for the cuppa session in a couple of weeks, to just be able to reflect back and go, okay, well, what does it look like when you've practiced putting this compassion into practice? So it might be, I don't know, I guess a couple of the things that I might think about might be things like actually setting in place, and I think I said it in there, of putting a few exercises out there, and then we share a bit of accountability on actually practicing the compassion exercises to build that skill. Or one goal we might do is actually working through this type of map with our partner, or even bringing it back, just kind of working through it for yourselves as well. So there are a couple of my ideas, but open to your thoughts before we finish off. And you guys have been really put on the spot in being the two that are joining in live.
I think sometimes, Steph, I have with compassion, sometimes I can get it confused with say like giving up, like just like, oh, I'll let him do what, that my actual concerns aren't worthy enough, like,
Yeah.
so if you took the situation of coming home after being away and then, like he's like, oh, you've left me with all the kids, instead of necessarily him asking how your weekend was away. So then I feel guilty for having gone away and almost sort of give up in a way that that's too hard to do that anymore. And I think sometimes I confuse that, because you think you're being compassionate. Oh, he's so busy on the farm, he can't do that. That then, yeah, you give up a bit. Like,
Yeah.
so I guess I find that hard with compassion, that line, to be compassionate that he's upset, and that without giving up your goals as well.
Yeah. And I think that's one, it is so tricky. It's, I think, making sure we're also bringing that compassion in there for ourselves as well. So this isn't just about giving more and putting ourselves more and more in the back seat, because I think we're all pretty good at doing that. But ways of, I guess, it might be approaching the situation differently, but also then that flow-on effect for ourselves as well. So compassion, when you start to bring it in there, might be treating yourself in there with kindness, of being able to stop and recognize, okay, we are all feeling exhausted in this situation. That doesn't have to mean letting go of what's important to you. And yeah, it's something I feel like there's not a clear-cut line of what it should look like. And I think some of the behaviors on the outside might look the same. Like I used to use an example, and this isn't strictly a compassion example, but more a values-focused action, because I guess that's also another a big part of the approach within here. And you would have seen like the values reminder come out this morning. And what we do is that what we're working towards is making the choices on our behaviours and our actions based on our values and what's important to us, rather than on our like autopilot responses to our thoughts and our feelings and everything that comes up inside of us. And an example for that, I've forgotten about it, just kind of came back to mind, was like seeding time, and when you're kind of looking after, actually this was pre-kids, so slightly different, but same with when you've got kids around, is that like, my husband's really tired, I'm trying to do everything at home, and something happens, like I've got his tea and stuff ready, but then it turns out he's not going to be home for tea because he's still out on the tractor for a few more hours. And he's possibly spoken to me like, gotten grumpy over something going wrong on the farm and taking it out on me. And so my gut reaction, what I immediately want to do is just scrape his food into the bin and go, that stuff it, you sort yourself out, see you later. But when I kind of pause and stop and notice, I can kind of step in and go, okay, well, what's my values in this situation? And so it might be kind of bringing compassion into that situation, or it might also be being supportive or bringing kindness in. And so the example I used to use was that it was like, okay, well, I'm actually going to pop his food into a container and go off and drop it off. So there's always part of me that goes, oh, am I just getting sucked into just having to do more to help him out? But it's then looking at that flow-on effect for me. So kind of going, right, let's pop the food in, pop all the kids in the car, even in their jammies. They're going to go to sleep easier, because it's actually easier sometimes to get them to sleep in the car than it is to get them to sleep at home. But also then on that drive down to see him, when I'm treating myself with compassion, instead of replaying those arguments and doing that really almost like out of a huff and going, oh, this is so unfair and he doesn't do any of this for me, or whatever it might be, being able to take that breathing space and step back and go, okay, well, what's actually most important to me, and building those connections. And then it's that flow on afterwards. So it might be that actually we all jump in and go for a drive in the tractor and get that time to connect. And then I get that bit of space away to then come back to things, and then seeing then there's that flow on once he comes home, that he might step up and unload the dishwasher or something in return. So I think I've just gone on a complete ramble away, but it's a little bit, yeah, and I do find there is always that part that's going, oh, am I giving in? But being able to hold on to the values of going, okay, well, what does that compassion look like? And even if I bring that sense of wisdom, and what compassion might actually look like is then giving yourself that strength to a couple of days after, when the tensions have settled a little bit, or when things are a bit cooler. Compassion might also look like bringing up a conversation of going, hey, me going away for the weekend is really, really important for me. And I know you've got all of this stuff going on, but it doesn't work for either of us when I get back, and this is how it goes. So how can we make it different in the future? So compassion can still be about having those tricky conversations, but it's maybe about having that almost like stepping back and noticing, and then choosing when we do it as well. If that makes sense in a very long-winded way.
Yeah.
And I so wish there was an easy way of all of these things, but there isn't particularly. There's not really a magical wand, but it's about just, and I guess that's why I've created this idea of masterclasses. Like every one of the things that we're focusing on each month could literally probably be like an 8-week course or program. But gone, okay, let's just have these brief sessions where we can use it as a theme and a check-in, but also different things will sit differently for different people. So that then you can kind of start to say, okay, yeah, this was something that I found quite helpful. Maybe we'll go a little bit further into that one, or different ideas. So from next month onwards, we'll be bringing in some lots of other awesome women each month. So I'm going to have to be even firmer on my time management once I've got someone to chat to as well. But just so we can kind of use their skills and wisdom. So September, we have got Bridget Johns, who does decluttering, but lots of things around like simplifying the load, and so focusing in a little bit on how we can kind of simplify things down. So that's kind of the focus from September. Any other, because I've realised we have gone well over the 1:30 mark, and I'm mindful your time is valuable, so we can finish off shortly. But did either of you have any other questions or thoughts or reflections while we're here at all?
I was probably thinking of I'm actually going away next week again, so I might be able to approach it differently. I think I'd have a bit of a goal of that, and I've also got some younger kids and teenagers, and I'm just wondering whether this is something I can use towards them when they get home and do absolutely nothing except sit on their phone, and it drives you nuts, and it's like having another adult that doesn't help out, sort of thing. But yeah, so I'm thinking I might try and sort of just set myself a couple of goals of seeing if I can tweak it a little bit and see what happens.
Yeah, amazing. And so it could be like kind of using it almost like as a reflective tool, but also a forward planning tool of going, right, I'm about to go into this situation again. How can I do it a little bit differently next time? And then, yeah, definitely it can. I actually did it a while ago, kind of accidentally with it was 4 at the time, with my 4-year-old. And the stuff that he came out with, I'm like, oh, I know this works with kids and families. Why don't I remember to actually do it with my own family? Just even, being able to walk through and look at, okay, well, what matters to us as a family? How do we, what are these actions that we can put in place to start us doing these things? So I'd love to know how you go, Liz, with using it as a bit of a tool to have a bit of that family conversation. Be very cool to see.
I'm not sure if there'll be a conversation or I'll just try it in the background, but we'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
Good luck.
And it might definitely be even for yourself first, and that might be especially for this first month while you're kind of getting used to it as a tool, using it for yourself first, getting a bit more of that familiarity with it, and then kind of introducing it inwards, afterwards, outwards. Get what I mean? Amazing. Well, thank you both so much for joining in live for it all. I'll stop the recording there.